Hello and happy Thursday. Hope you're doing really well. And today we're going to review sections 23.7 and 23.8 about the mollusks and echinoderms. And then you're going to have a test on those two sections tomorrow. And then we'll be moving on to the next chapter after that. So with that being said, let's remember that these two sections are only about mollusks, which I have a few examples of shells of mollusks here. Talk about more of those in a minute. And echinoderms, like the starfish. I know you're totally impressed that I have this, right? Yes. Okay, so let's review some of the characteristics of mollusks first. Mollusks are from the phylum Mollusca, and they have a mantle. Now, the mantle is like this covering that covers many of their bodies, and it's also what secretes their hard shell. And many of the mollusks actually have a shell in some way, shape, or form, except for one big group that we'll talk about in a minute. Most mollusks have what we call a radula, which is a really, really sharp tongue. You do not want to mess with that because it can tear you up. And so they usually don't attack humans, so don't worry about that. But the radula is something that is definitely to their advantage when it comes to eating. And they have an open circulatory system, which means that their blood is not contained in vessels. It's just kind of sloshing around. And then they are coelomates, which means that they have fluid surrounding their tissues that's also lined. And they're what we call protostomes. And so coelomates, we learned about this really in the next section with the echinoderms, but you can have protostomes and you can have deuterostomes. And the mollusks are protostomes, which means that they're coelom formed from masses of cells that were in the embryo. And we'll talk more about deuterostomes when we talk about the echinoderms. So let's go ahead and explore like the three main classes of mollusks. Okay, the first one would be the gastropods. The gastropods actually are the largest group, and they're going to have one single shell. And so this is a really pretty example. I think I actually bought this in the store. It's all polished up, nice and neat. But that's where the animal lived here. And it's the thing that would stick out when it was alive would be its, quote, foot. And we call it a foot. It's not really like our foot at all. It doesn't have bones in it and things like that. Okay, but it's this slimy tissue that sticks out, and that's what it uses to move around and stuff like that. And so here's one rather large one. And then you can find these at the beach. Like you might have seen one kind of like this. Okay, and then there's the underneath part. There's actually like a little shell caught in there, and I really don't feel like digging it out. So we'll just go with that. And then this is also a similar shape. Notice how it's usually like a spiral shaped shell, whether it's really big or even the smaller one on the end, you can see the spiral shape, which is pretty good. And then this looks like a little baby conch shell, like conch would be one of those too. And you know how they say you can hear the ocean when you hold it up to your ear? It's really not true. Basically what you're hearing are all the air particles like bouncing off the walls inside the shell because it keeps spiraling up in there. And so it's pretty cool, but it's actually not really the ocean. But people tell little kids that all the time, right? All right, so the gastropods, I already mentioned that they just have one foot. I think I hit on most of these already. One foot. They are the largest class, so there are more of these than in either of the other two types, and they're mostly marine, meaning they mostly live in the ocean. Of course, both snails and slugs, which are basically snails without their shell, they can live on land and in fresh water too, in addition to salt water. So you can have snails that live in the ocean, in a pond or an aquarium even. People will buy them for their aquariums. And then also on land, same with the slugs. So keep that in mind. And they're going to have one shell, or in the case of slugs, no shell at all. Okay, so those are the gastropods. And then the second class of mollusks would be the bivalves. Bi means two, like a bicycle has two wheels. And so these would have hinged shells. And you're probably most familiar with these because these are things that people might eat, like oysters. And so this is only half of an oyster shell. Like it had another half at one point, but it's really hard to find like both halves intact of these because when the organism is eaten or dies, the shells just kind of come apart and get tossed around by the waves and things like that. So, oyster definitely would be one. And then this is something you might recognize. It also will grow in lakes and ponds. This is a mussel, and again, it's only half of the shell. Okay, the other half, who knows where it is? Only God really knows, right? And then there are all kinds of like different ones, like a lot of the shells that we see and pick up at the beach, they're just half of the original shell that the organism had, and then the organism was a soft body living inside. Okay, so let's go over some of those characteristics besides the fact that bivalves have two shells. They can be marine or freshwater, and they filter the water for food. And so they're not aggressive. They're not going to go out and bite people or move around a whole lot. They can move, but they're not going to be preying after other things that move. They like to just kind of filter the water and get food out of the water, like plankton and stuff like that. And then they also can use their foot to dig, to anchor themselves. Like if the tides are coming in or going out or whatever, they can use their foot to like dig in. And that's pretty cool. So we've had gastropods, we've had bivalves, now we have cephalopods, also known as head-footed mollusks, hence cephalopod, referring to the head. And these are what we would call a little bit more advanced. They can swim around. They're typically predators. They're going to be fast, most of the ones that swim around. And octopuses like to live near the floor, but they can move around and jet around really fast too. And so these either have just a partial shell, kind of an internal shell sometimes, or missing the shell at all, or with the exception of the nautilus. The nautilus will have an actual shell that's spiral shaped, kind of like the gastropods. Okay, but they also have tentacles. And this is kind of up for debate. Like a lot of people will say that the octopus we know it has 8, but they say it's really truly 8 arms instead of tentacles because they're muscular and things like that. And then squid have 10, and technically it's supposed to be 2 arms and 8 tentacles. 2 plus 8 is 10. A nautilus will have 90 tentacles, which is kind of crazy. So that's pretty wild. And I think we covered most of the stuff about those. So let's go on to echinoderms. Oops, this got messed up a little bit. But echinoderms is another phylum, and this is in section 23.8. And they're known for a rough, spiny skin. So these are not smooth. A lot of times they actually literally have spines sticking out of them. And they have what we call an endoskeleton. And if you remember from the video that you saw, the starfish has like all those little bony plates. They're tiny, but they've got muscles in between them, and they can really move around well. And they have a water vascular system. It's kind of cool because they're surrounded by water because they're living in the ocean, but yet they can intake that water and use it to kind of inflate and pump up the mechanisms that are going to make their arms move and things like that. Almost all of the echinoderms can regenerate lost body parts. So if a starfish loses an arm, maybe something comes and eats it off or gets into a little bit of an accident, it can actually regrow that arm. If you chop a starfish in half, as long as it's not like at a critical point, it can regrow both halves, which is pretty cool. And then there's a question about symmetry, because this is one of those things where you look and people on the internet say it's got radial symmetry. And then other people on the internet say it's technically not radial symmetry because they say that the mouth is offset. And so this is like a preserved starfish. Like this was a real starfish. And you can see its mouth would be in that area right there. And they say that it's offset. I don't know. It looks pretty central to me. But some people say, and I think your book says this too, that it's a slightly offset. So they say technically it's bilateral symmetry. The video that we watched says that it's a 5-part symmetry. That makes the most sense to me. And so the symmetry thing is a little bit, It's one of those things where you can definitely find people that agree that it has radial symmetry, and you can definitely find people that say it's got bilateral symmetry. I think saying it has 5-part symmetry would probably be the best bet. So we'll go with that. And then also they are coelomates. And remember, these are the deuterostomes. Okay, and that means that their coelom was formed from a portion of the digestive tube while it was an embryo. And I do want to point out that the larvae of the echinoderms, like the after they hatch from eggs, that's going to have bilateral symmetry. And I don't think the video covered the reproduction or the larva at all. So I just wanted to point that out a little bit. And so we've covered a lot about echinoderms and mollusks. And like I said, you're going to have a test on that tomorrow. Again, let me encourage you to keep up the hard work. I know that it's a little bit different experience, actually a lot different experience. And you guys are doing an amazing job turning in your work and just staying on top of things. Please continue that good work. Please reach out to me. You can always email me at sdixon@evajax.com if you have a comment or questions or anything. Remember that I'm here to help, and I'm praying for you guys as we move forward, and it looks like we're going to be doing this for the rest of the year. So I know you can do it because you've done so well so far. So have a great day, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you do on your test tomorrow.